Well, Jeff, we've had a really busy week, haven't we? We could spend the whole hour just talking about, I don't know, new books out maybe about certain administrations or op-eds that we don't know who the authors were.
In fact, I've already I'm on the waiting list already for the new Bob Woodward book because after the attention this week, I cannot wait to read this.
Yeah, it's promises to be a very interesting read. And also, we have primaries coming up, right?
In fact,
Thursday primary.
That's
September 13th.
I'm glad you mentioned that because people are used to the primaries being on Tuesday in September. So that's one of our roles here is to let people know WBAI is going to be very active in following the primaries this coming Thursday and how the votes are lining up.
And of course, as we started the show, this is our back to school episode, and the schools opened on Wednesday. I saw lots of pictures on Facebook of kids with backpacks, and everyone looked happy and smiling faces, and the parents were so happy to have the kids back at school. But there are a lot of serious issues that are facing the New York City school system, schools around the country. And here now to join us to talk about some of those issues is none other than Randi Weingarten, President of the American Federation of Teachers, AFL-CIO. It's 1.7 million member union, which represents teachers, paraprofessionals, school-related personnel, higher education faculty and staff, nurses and other healthcare professionals, and a number of other government employees and childhood educators. As many of you may know who are listening, Ms. Weingarten was the UFT president for about a dozen years prior to her election as the AFT president in 2008. And she is here today for the Labor Day parade, and I think she might even be marching right now. So this is going to be an action-oriented segment. Randy, are you with us?
I am with you, and I am marching in the parade, and I'm walking back to where the UFT is marching. We happen to have in this Labor Day parade the AFT. First off, it's great. It's always great to be in New York. It's always great to celebrate Labor Day with working people in New York. And, the AFT has the college professors, the PFC, PEF, the Public Employees Federation, the UST. So it's a busy day to just highlight the work of people in New York State and New York City who make a difference every single day in the lives of others.
So, Randy, just real quickly, because
UUP, too, I forgot that UUP represents all of the doctors and the nurses at downstate.
At New York One, I used to cover the Labor Day parade, and it was disappointing to me at times not to see as many people along the sidelines cheering on labor and showing their respect. What are you seeing today? Is there a bigger turnout despite some of the icky weather in light of concerns and advocacy given the administration? I'm curious if you're seeing more people on the sidelines today.
Well, I see more. I see more people on the sidelines today. I tend to. There are more people on the side today than I've seen in the past, but more importantly, there are tons and tons of people in the streets marching. And what tends to happen in the Labor Day parade, as opposed to some of the other parades in New York, is that every union in the town tries to get its people to actually march, and that's really, really important. And it's different than the other parades where there are groups that are marching, and a lot of the people who feel an affinity stay outside, stay on the side. But what I'm seeing, frankly, throughout the country is that millennials, as we have the motorcycle guys. I don't know if there's a motorcycle gal who's in there, but the motorcycle guys are passing us right now. But what I'm seeing throughout the country is consistent with what the new Gallup poll has said, which is that the group that really believes in unions more than any other group now is millennials. And so people who understand at a gut level that they need to gather with others to change the status quo, to change the power dynamic in the United States right now to make sure that workers get a piece of the economic pie, not just those who are already rich. And so right now what you're seeing is 78% of millennials are saying we want a union movement and we need unions.
So that is such an interesting statistic. And Jeff, let's make a mental note. We want to do a show just on that topic, I think.
I'm with you.
Because there's so much to unpack in what you just said, Randy. And we also want to talk a little bit about the pressures that labor is facing right now, especially in a post-Janus world.
Right.
But first, focusing on schools. What do you see as the major challenges our public schools are facing right now around the country?
So there's three major challenges. Number one is investment. And you saw that in terms of walkouts, the teacher walkouts in West Virginia, in Oklahoma, in Arizona. 25 states spend less on public education today than they did when the Great Recession in 2008 started. 25 states. And even though, New York does not do the investment that we believe it should, and our unions locally and statewide, fights for that, both in terms of K-12 and higher education, what you're seeing is places like West Virginia, that salaries have actually gone down because of the increase in healthcare costs. In Oklahoma, what you saw was 4-day school week. You saw the stories in Oklahoma that we used to tell in New York City in the midst of the 70s fiscal crisis. That books, I saw books, high school social studies books that had LBJ as president. Not even, forget about Trump. Not even Barack Obama as president. A high school social studies teacher who just testified against Kavanaugh in the Congress yesterday, one of our members in Oklahoma City, told me when I was there that her classes, she's been teaching for about 20 years. She makes $40,000 a year. Her classes will normally have like 40 or 50 kids, and she'll have 20 or 30 or 40 desks and even less chairs. And this is what teachers are going through in a lot of states, which is why they did those kind of strikes, because we've tried over and over again to get things done, and the politicians in those states would essentially disparage or dismiss. In some ways, very much like what Betsy DeVos does nationally. When her first budget, she tried to cut every single after-school program, every single summer school program. And this year, to start this year, she tried to take away monies that go for guidance counselors and nurses and for mental health services and use them to arm teachers. So money is a big issue. And the second issue is the issue of latitude and ensuring that teachers can actually have the latitude to teach, not a fixation on testing. And that's changing around the country, but it's not changing fast enough. And the third is that as kids were telling me in Burnsville, Minnesota, a couple of days ago, I said to them, has Donald Trump affected your lives in school? And they're like, yeah, the racial tensions in this very diverse district right outside St. Paul and Minneapolis, they started talking about how the tensions, how the division has really affected them. So I think it's those three things.
What are some of the lessons that we can learn from this period in our history?
Well, the first lesson we can learn is that elections matter. I wish we did not have this case study, but we do. And elections matter, and people's voices count. And what's happening in the country, I don't want to be hyperbolic about it. I want to just be factual. What's happening in the country is that the people who wanted Donald Trump to be president, who are supporting him right now, like the Koch brothers, I'm not talking about his base. I'm not talking about individuals, but I'm talking about the money interests. What they do is they basically want the status quo. They like that the inequality. They like the fact that they are very, very, very rich. They like the tax cuts. And what they do is they want two things. They want to use the divisiveness to try to divide people so that there is not enough people who will, oust them from office or oust them for power. So they use the fear of the other. That's what Trump is so good at, to try to divide and conquer. But the second thing they do is that they actually really, truly believe, and it's hard for me to say this, they actually really believe that people should just have to fend for themselves. So when you hear that somebody is laid off, they'll say, oh, well, they're laid off because it's their fault. Really? If a plant closes, like my father, who worked as an electrical engineer, his plant closed. He wanted a job. It wasn't his fault that he was laid off. But this is what they think. They think that if somebody can't pay for college, so what? Who cares? So we have $1.5 trillion of student debt. So this notion, so what we have to learn from this is that we need a lot more Roosevelts around again. We need a lot more of what I used to teach my high school students, of the Lockean social contracts, that we cede some rights to each other to have a more perfect union, to have a union that focuses on a common good, so that if somebody has a pre-existing condition, they actually can get health care so that they're not one illness away from bankruptcy. If somebody is poor, they actually have a good public school with real services so they can climb the ladder of opportunity. If somebody doesn't have money for college, that we support them in college so that they can seize their dreams. If somebody is older and doesn't have a pension, they have Social Security. And that is what we have to take from this, that the democracy, the voice, is about trying to make sure that working people secure a better life, and those who work hard and play by the rules can actually climb that ladder. And too often what's happened in this country in the last 2 years is that's been squashed.
You have been listening to Randi Weingarten, along with me, Jeff Simmons, and co-host Edwina Francis Martin on City Watch, WBAI, New York 99.5 FM, and streaming live at WBAI.org.
Randi, I had mentioned challenges to labor earlier on in our conversation. Can you, for our listeners, just briefly sum up the meaning of the recent Janus decision from the U.S. Supreme Court, and then share with us how the AFT and other unions are responding to this dreadful decision?
Right. So remember what I said earlier in your program, that the right wing, that there really is two, separate and apart from the fear and the division and the hate that is promoted by people like Trump, that there really are two different, very different ideologies in this country. And one is basically promoted by rich cats who basically say, everybody should fend for themselves. And by that, they mean that they freeze in place the power they have because they don't want to share with anybody else. That is the origins of the Janus case. These folks hate labor because what happens is that the labor movement brings a lot of working people together, and when you're together, you're stronger together, and you can fight for things that is impossible to get to alone. That is what collective bargaining is all about. That is what unions are all about. So they have tried since the 1960s to figure out ways to use the courts, use the law, to try to undermine that collective power. And this idea of using the First Amendment as a weapon is something that has just happened. It's not new, but the moment that Gorsuch got on the court, 2 weeks later, because the Alito, who is one of the other court justices, he counts votes. 2 weeks later, the right wing brought the Janus case, which was basically overruling 45 years of precedent. By the way, precedent that was unanimously decided 45 years ago by the then Supreme Court in the Abood decision, that said that states could make a decision about how they wanted to regulate labor relations with their employees. And that one of the decisions 25 states made was to have labor peace, to ensure real effectiveness of services, they would give their employees a voice at work if the employees wanted it, with one condition, that if the union represented people, they had to represent everybody. And then the second condition was that if they represented everybody, that everybody would pay their fair share. That was the precedent for 45 years. It was challenged 6 or 7 times, and it was only overturned now because of ideology, because, as Trump said, 2 minutes after the decision was issued, he applauded the decision, saying, see, now the Democrats, now the unions are out of politics, now the Democrats don't have the unions. So it was really about power, taking power away from working people to have a better life, power that they get at the bargaining table and the ballot box in order to actually ensure that the already powerful stayed powerful. Now, what we've done is you can't cry over spilt milk. It's over. No. I wish that it didn't happen. I wish that Merrick Garland was on the court. I wish that, the power play hadn't happened, but it did. But this is what's going on in our union. We saw the handwriting on the wall, and we actually were able to start 3, 4, 5 years ago changing culture to bring our union back to its roots, to start talking to people again in a way where the members for the last 10, 20 years have basically said, we elect you as leaders, you do our work. And we basically said, look, we got to be all in it together. We have to work together. We have to talk to each other. And what's happened in our union, and I know, frankly, it's surprising to me, is overwhelmingly, by like 95 to 99%, people are sticking with the union. And agency fee payers, meaning these fair share payers, are starting to come back. So people get, even if they, don't like some of the things I do, or Michael Mulgrew does, or Barbara Bowen does, they're like, look, we need that power, we need those contracts, we need that voice. So we have done quite well in terms of people recommitting and in terms of back to school.
That is very heartening to hear. I want to remind our listeners that this year is the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King, who was in Memphis, Tennessee, I think it was, for a garbage workers strike, right, to lend them support in a life and death fight. They had started that strike because of workers dying. So this is just such a critically life and death issue, and it's really heartening to hear that your members are getting that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is like what happened, and now I'm going back to march with the UFT members as I'm talking to you. My home, I love the UFT. I love my home. I love teaching in New York City. And, you see, but I just want to lift up those sanitation workers, those teachers. Everybody needs a voice and dignity. And that's what the labor movement is. Are we always perfect? No, we are not always perfect. Do we make mistakes? Yes, we make mistakes. But what people need to recognize that much of what goes on in the country against the labor movement is funded by Koch brothers, the Voss family, and others who just don't want people to have to fend for themselves. They don't want working people to have power. They want somebody to have to go to the boss privately and say, oh, please, I need a raise. And what has happened is that when you see, just if you look at historically over the last 50 years, you see when the labor movement had its greatest density, the middle class had its ascendancy. And so that is what we're fighting against. And the one other thing I'd like to say is that people get it. Regular folks get it. And whether they're Trump voters or whether they were Clinton voters or Bernie Sanders voters or Barack Obama voters, what we're seeing in terms of labor, in terms of Missouri. Missouri had on the ballot this notion of Janus for the private sector, that you just basically, give up, limit the ability of unions to do their jobs. And it lost 2-1 in Missouri. People get, like millennials do right now, that they need the power of a union to get the economic benefits that people need.
So, Randy, we've got about a minute left, and just dovetailing with what Edwina had asked about, I'd read a wonderful piece by Isaac Dover about you in Politico, and it mentioned something you had written and then posted on your wall that you had written on Martin Luther King Jr. Day weekend, where the end of it said, "It is a which side are you on moment." So, Randy, which side are you on, and why should people think about that in this day and age?
Look, this is a which side are you on moment in terms of the right wing has made it pretty clear that they don't care about authoritarianism. They don't care about the norms of democracy. They don't care about checks and balances. And they really don't care about the economic dignity and rights of regular folks. They'll use fear and bigotry against people. Nowhere is that clearer than the separation of children from their parents and the border. And I, as someone whose grandparents came from the Ukraine, we need to be better than this. The McCain funeral showed we can be better than this, regardless of ideology. We need to be a democracy that believes in the dignity of all people. That's why it's a which side of you on moment. And I am on the side of fighting for democracy, fighting for economic dignity, fighting for good public schools, fighting against hate and bigotry, and fighting to make sure that everybody has a voice and a vote, and that's why November is so important.
We're all here, you and us, WBAI, fighting for the 99%. And lifting our voices. Thanks so much for all of the incredible work you're doing. Before we let you go to continue enjoying the parade, how can folks listening today learn more about the AFT?
AFT.org is our website. I tweet virtually, I am addicted to Twitter. I wish I wasn't, but I use it as a way to communicate with the general public as well as our members. And so my Twitter is R. Weingarten. AFT Twitter is AFT Union. Our website is AFT.org. We would love people to follow us, and we spend as much time caring as we do fighting for the common, for ensuring that people have a better life. And if people want to call me, write me, they can direct message me on Twitter. They can write to the AFT. They can leave a message on the AFT mailbox. But at the end of the day, we are about ensuring that people have a better life, and we know that these elections are key to that. So I don't care what you believe or who you believe in, but most importantly, go vote in November, and ultimately, I hope that we can together create a more democratic country, a country that has a voice for all and believes in the common dignity and humanity for all.
Wow. Well, hear, hear. Randi, enjoy the parade.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us here on WBAI today on City Watch.